Hi, and welcome to this edition of Monster Lab. Today we're going into the bowels of Distortions to show you how to make your very own monster mask from scratch. All right, so let's begin. Now, there are certain tools that are absolutely necessary in my opinion, and I'm going to go over those. Only one is really kind of a little exotic, but here we go. First of all, you need a tool like this. This is essentially like a little finger, and it's got a point on the other side which comes in very handy between teeth. This is a fairly common sculpting tool. It's a little thin wire that has kind of a V shape, and it's got another shape on the other side. I don't use as much, but sometimes. Then, now this is the exotic one. This one, you're not going to find it at your normal small town kind of sculpting tool. Something like this you can get at Reynolds, you could get from Ken's Tools, but it's got little teeny teeth on the end of the rake. You got a circle on one side, a square on the other. I use the square almost always. This is very important. I'm going to show you why later. The other tool is paintbrushes. I like a big one for, early on, and then a little one to go in around the eyes and stuff like this. Fairly soft bristle. This got a little stiffness to it. Oh, it's got a little smoke too. A knife to cut the clay. This tool, it's got teeth around it. It's kind of a kidney-shaped tool. This is very helpful with large anatomy, and we'll be going over that also. A sponge, water in a little bucket, and a spray bottle. Now, the only other two very essential things, you'll need some kind of armature. Now, normally I would sculpt on a head bust, but I was trying to do this from ground up, like you're starting fresh and you don't want to spend $200 getting all this stuff before you can even get started. You might find out you hate it. So there's an armature I just made out of wood, and the other final thing is Laguna Wed clay. That's W-E-D clay. Now you can sculpt in other things if you've got something local and you want to use it. But that's the best, and I highly recommend it for a multitude of reasons. Don't want to go through on this video. Now, here's secondary tools if you want to start off with a little more of a bang. Now, you can sculpt eyes, but it's very nice if you find some balls or something like this about the size you need. And these are plastic ones I've poured up, but you can find all sorts of things that are round and just use that. It helps when you're doing eyes. I find a pen very helpful for little teeny details and dots and things. This tool is another a little more exotic tool. It's a very, very fine wire that's kind of got a V on it. Very helpful. These are just like the other rake. They've got a rough edge, that's a serrated edge, and it helps with large anatomy. Not critical, very helpful. A little black sponge that's used for smoothing. This is extremely porous. You can find it in beauty shops, sculpting supply places. A little bit more exotic. Calipers are very nice. Now, we're going to go over some of this as far as sizing, where to put the eyes and so forth. Calipers help a lot. So you can kind of like, it needs to be this much, plus another ½ inch all the way around. The reason I say that is the sculpture, the clay is going to shrink a little, not much, but when you make a mold of it and you pour it in latex, the latex is actually going to shrink up a little bit, and it has to fit on the outside of your face. So I like to add at least ½ inch to whatever the dimensions you come up with this are, but you can do it with a tape measure if you have a tape measure around. It's just better. This is very fancy. I got this at Reynolds Sculpting Supply. It's for cutting clay. You can adjust the thickness of the clay to very thin to very thick. Just speeds it up. The knife will work too. At the end, We like to spray with spray paint. I use this Krylon Leather Brown. Now I'm sure other ones will work. Now this is a gloss, and the gloss is very important because it makes a barrier that between the clay and the plaster. Not necessary. Sometimes if we're in a hurry, we'll just cast it, but it is a nice feature. The only warning, this is very important, if you do decide to spray your sculpture, let it sit for a couple hours under a fan or wait overnight, because you sure don't want to put plaster on fresh paint. It sticks to the mold. These are texture sponges. I got these from Jordu. There's places around the house you can find cool textures. Maybe it's some old leather thing, or maybe it's an orange or grapefruit or something like that. And these you push into the clay toward the end of the sculpture to make skin texture and stuff. Very, very helpful. Not necessary. The other tools will do a fine job. The sponge and so forth. This is my boomstick. This helps to hammer the clay onto your armature to make sure that there aren't a lot of air bubbles and things, and it's really wrapped around your structure. I just took a 4x4 and cut it kind of fancy and wrapped some tape around it so it doesn't stick so much, duct tape. The last thing is a Lazy Susan, and this comes in very handy if you're lazy, Susan. So it's just a little deluxe thing. You don't need it. You can spin it. I'm just saying we like to use them around here. So you take your armature that I just made out of 2x4s and plywood. And now this could lay flat. You could just cut a piece of wood, just lay it flat, sculpt above it. But then you kind of got to hover over it like a vulture. So we don't like to do that. We like to just sit here comfortably, have our libation, and sculpt a little, drink a little. If you choose to drink adult beverages, your sculpture won't turn out as good as it would have, so I caution you against that. So that's it. I'm going to get started here, and we'll take it from there. All right, I like to wet the wood down. It just creates a little bit more of a vacuum. If I was Picasso, I'd be done. All right. Just make sure you get it well anchored, this first layer, because you don't want your monster doing a face plant. That's no good. All right, do a little caliper check. And I'm leaving about a 1/2 inch more. Now we're going to make this a 3/4 mask so that it slips on easy and it sits on your head. You don't need an elastic band or something like a half mask, which nothing wrong with a half mask. But 3/4 mass, I'm just going to have to build it up a little more on the top and make sure I've got enough to wrap around. Oh, by the way, today I've decided to sculpt a zombie alien. Now this is not something you see every day, but this is something I wanted to mention. When you're going to sculpt something, how many zombies does the world really need? So I always like to have a hook, like music. You know how it has a hook with the melody? I like to come up with something clever that's kind of the foundation of it. And in this case, it's just weird. Nobody thinks about zombie aliens. So that's my hook, and that's what I'm making, zombie alien. So I now have roughly a mass that's a little bit bigger than my face. So I'm taking the calipers and, so it's a little fatter than that. And then height-wise, should have about 3/4 of an inch. So I have extra. So this, if I took it right now, should just slide over my face. I've angled it down here so that it'll kind of wrap around my skull a little bit. Also, I found that as I was doing this 3/4 mask, that it was leaning down too much. So I put these blocks in place. I should have had it laid over a little more. I wasn't really thinking about that, but so that it's looking at me more straight on. And so now what I have to do is figure out where the eyes go. Now what's surprising to a lot of sculptors is your eyes are almost in the middle of your face. People don't think that way, and it's not quite true. They're slightly above center, but So to give you an idea, so that's where my head fits inside of there, and that would put center about there. Now, in actuality, my eyes are probably in this area somewhere. So I want to put the alien eyes down. Now say my pupil's right here, if my calculations are correct. So I want the pupils for the alien just below that, because I'm going to hide my eye slits just above in a wrinkle or something. So I'm going to cut away a little of the clay, and so it'll make it easier to stick it in there. I think I'll use this one. One thing that's kind of a detail, but pretty important, your eyes are not completely flat on your face. They're kind of turned. So I'm allowing for that. Even though the balls, you can take care of that later. It's nice to just make sure you've got the headroom you need. And also, eyes are about an eyeball apart. So you got an eye, an eye, and an eye. So I would say my slits are about there. Need a little more room in the middle, and then just kind of cinch them into the clay. You're going to have to best guess it. You may have to make some adjustments, but see how they're kind of not totally straight in the sculpture. And then, you go back. Now I like to take little snakes and make eyelids. So, put an eyelid there. Here. And actually it's a little lower. And now here's a thought. You can do with a lot with emotion with the skin around the eyes. It's not the eyeball that does it. It's all this little stuff the skin does. So, like if I wanted to make him just kind of like, duh, I'm smarter than you. I don't have to worry about it. Or you might want to make him a little more angry. So, I tend toward the angry. My monsters are usually not happy. So what you can do is control your emotions with the eyelids. You you can come in like this. And so he's kind of getting a little bit ticked off. Bring that up. And that's something you can play with. I'm not sure how I'm going to go with this guy, but that's how you kind of place the eyes. And the eyes are going to be your most important thing to get right as far as positioning. And so I may have to move them up. I think I accidentally dropped down. Here's my sight line. And what you can do is draw in, like get your center and your sight line, draw those in, and then place your eyeballs. So I kind of put it in the middle of what I dug out, and that wasn't quite right. So we'll move them up, and I'll keep doing large anatomy. Now the tool I've used a lot here is this kidney tool with the little teeth that really helps you to get in there and start shaping. I haven't done a lot of shaping yet, but getting your large anatomy is really important. Everybody kind of wants to jump the gun and start going into the detail, and because that's more fun. Don't do that. Make sure that large anatomy is right, and you can stand back and squint your eyes, and it's like, yeah, that's right, it looks good, and then go in for the fine detail later. Okay, so we continue. Now I'm starting to bulk out the major anatomy, and there's a thing I like to do. I mean, you can doodle around with a drawing and get it, try a few different things till you get something you like. I actually like to get just a rough idea in my head a lot of times and then do the creative work in clay. So right now I'm playing with some interesting cheekbones and trying to get something unique. Again, that hook I talked about earlier. But, there's a thing we do around here that is like breaking the rules when it comes to anatomy. Now, I'll say this, that anatomy is critical. In fact, really you should study the human face and bones and things, but then you can push it, especially when you're dealing with an alien. You can push reality. However, if you push too much and in too many ways, it suddenly, people look at it and say, something's wrong with that. So it has to be believable. Now, one of the ways I'm pushing this is more cultural. Aliens, because they're so smart, it's like they don't need to be beast-like. They don't need to protect their eyes. They have these big eyes. They're out in the open because they just can fry you with a laser or something like that. I'm pushing that a little bit. I want to give him a little more cheekbones. The only thing I knew I wanted to do in this sculpture was antenna, because in the end I want to show with and without hair and some different hair techniques. And for whatever reason, culturally, if you have antennas, you can get away with hair. I think that's due to Star Trek, I'm not sure. Anyway, so there's where he's at now. I'm playing with the nose and so forth, and still trying to get some interesting shapes, and we'll keep at it. So, I'm still working on anatomy. I wanted to push it and do some different things, and I'm playing around with stronger cheekbones and things that would normally be associated with an alien. I've been playing with the nasolabial folds, and now I'm going to try to figure out some kind of weird teeth and things like that. But one thing I wanted to point out that I do, I don't know if other sculptors do this as much, but I'll do something over here, and I'll keep working the area until, okay, that looks pretty good. And then I'll do something else over here, and then I'll compare, and I say, I like this one better. And so then I'll start to not quite copy it, tweak it a little bit over here, and I'll do that back and forth until I like that. And then I'll lock and load. So I've been doing some of that, playing with really trying to push some of the cheekbone anatomy. I don't know how much I can get away with. And I'm starting to model some of this because he's got to be, you know, a zombie. So I'm starting to take away the smooth features and get him a little bumpier. And of course, he needs antenna and ears. So I'll keep playing with it, and we'll see if we can turn him into something creepy, weird. Okay, so now I've got a kind of rough, blurry, the look I'm kind of going for. And this is a real good time to go in with your water and brushes and sponges, and it'll blur it, but it will also kind of clean it up. And then you go back in for detail. So I'm just gonna go at it with the brush here and the sponge, and you can see how it kind of cleans it up, but then it kind of blurs it. But then it's ready for fine detail. Now what I'm doing is kind of making mud, and so the spray bottle comes in handy to kind of clean it up. Now you don't want to get too carried away with this. You don't want to eliminate all your lines. You just want to get enough of this knocked down so that when you come in with the sponge, it's fairly clean looking. So now you can use natural sponges, are really good. Smaller ones than this are good for a little bit finer detail. And I actually take my finger and I'll kind of push the clay around a little bit with the sponge. And give it a little bit of fleshy organicness. Also, a thing that's nice to have is a hair dryer, so you can speed up and go to the next step. So then, like in some of these areas, I can take a smaller brush and kind of clean up those lines. This is something unique to water-based clay, and especially wet. You can really go in and move the clay around easily for a long time. It does start to stiffen up, and this is starting to stiffen up, but I can move the surface around anyway. Okay, then I go in, spray, kind of clean out some of my and you don't always have to pull the trigger real hard if you got something that's you don't want to obliterate detail. So while it's in this state, you can go in with a pretty soft touch. This is that sponge that can really blend away rough spots. So now I'm going in lightly and allowing the sponge to just give it kind of some texture and organicness. And again, I'm using my finger here to kind of break up the flat planes, especially since he's kind of roddy. And that's it. I'll do the other side. I'll dry it and then go in for finer detail. All right, so this guy's about done. Now, one thing to remember, if you work on this over a few days or something, be sure and cover it and seal it with plastic, some sort of plastic you can get all the way around it, and make sure air can't get in. Just a couple of little refining techniques. Now I've gone in and I've used the real small tool and also this tool to get some of these smaller lines. And one thing I like to do, now I textured a little bit with a sponge, a little bit with texture pads. But after you get it textured, I like to come in and on some of these high areas, just smooth it out so it's not all the same. And you know, kind of with the assumption the skin's kind of stretching over the bone in different areas. Another technique is really helpful. After you go in with the small brush, now you've done your big wet brush stuff and so forth, but now that it's dry, you can dip the brush in and then squeeze out the extra water. That gives you a slightly damp brush that will, you know, kind of eat away the rough edges without taking away your small detail. And I find that very helpful when you're refining the sculpture. So he's got just a little bit more to go, but basically that's it. That's the steps, and we're going to take it now to Mondo. He's going to cast it and go over how to mix the plaster in the second phase of this, and how to pull it, pour it, the whole bit with latex, the kind of latex, and then the final episode will be painting, and we're going to do 2 different paint jobs, one with an airbrush, one without, so that you're not stalled out like thinking, well, I can't do this without an airbrush. And then we'll also put hair on one of them, so that, or maybe on both, in a couple of different ways of doing hair, just so you kind of get the whole thing. So you're not just stuck, oh, well, now I know how to make an alien zombie, but nothing else. It'll really kind of cover everything you need to know. So that is it. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.